Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Adam Santos. I am a data scientist at the Mayor's Office for Economic Opportunity, or NYC Opportunity for short. And our office is a small but mighty shop that uses evidence and innovation to reduce poverty and increase equity. I had to write that part down because when I was practicing, I kept saying increase poverty and reduce equity, and that is not the goal. And we work on lots of different projects from data integration and analysis, service design, programs and evaluation, working on the adjusted NYC poverty rate, and developing and maintaining digital products such as Access NYC and Equity, both of whom have presentations later in Open Data Week. And so that is a plug for them. I will pass it over to my co-presenters, and then we will get started. So I'll pass to Claire.
Hi, everyone. I'm Claire Reynolds, and I'm also a data scientist for NYC Opportunity.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julene Moores, Digital Services Director with the Mayor's Office of Talent and Workforce Development, also known as NYC Talent. I help manage the Workforce Data Portal as well as Jobs NYC and work very closely with NICO. NYC Talent believes the greatest asset that we have as a city is the talent of New Yorkers. The mission of our office is to partner with public agencies, educational institutions, and the private sector, so New York City residents succeed in family-sustaining careers, and employers have the talent they need to thrive. I'm very happy to be here, and I will pass it back to Adam.
Thanks, Claire and Jaylene. And I also, we don't have presenters from our tireless integration team at OTI, but I see some of them on the call. So we wanted to make sure to give an acknowledgement that they are a very, very key part of this project. All right, today we're going to be talking about the Integrated Workforce Data Portal. And so we're going to go through a project history and an overview. And then Claire will give a demo of a public website that we've set up in order to display some of the results of the project and what we have. Then Jaylene will talk about some user research that we've conducted and that we're going to use to inform the next steps of the project. And then at the end, we'll ask you to fill out a very, very quick feedback form and then hopefully leave some time for questions at the end. If you have questions as we're going along, please put them in the chat. And if they're quick, we'll get to them right away. If not, then we'll save for the end. Okay, so what is the Workforce Data Portal? This project was designed to collect, connect, and display data from New York City funded workforce programs. Before we can talk about all of this data, one question that we want to answer is, what is a workforce program? A workforce program is designed to help a person advance in their career. And so that kind of activity that programs do can fall in a few different categories. First, it can connect a person directly with an employer. We call that a job placement. It can be a job training program where someone gets an elevated credential to get a better job. And then it also can be academic activities. So if someone gets a more advanced degree, the idea is that they will improve in their career. And so we pulled out some examples of New York City workforce programs just to highlight and describe so we can get a sense of what we're talking about here. And so the first one we're going to talk about is the Summer Youth Employment Program, SYEP. This is a internship program for high school students and young adults to go to over the summer to provide work opportunities over the summer. The Parks Opportunity Program is run by the Parks Department, and it has participants work for parks while they're going through the program, and then at the same time receive a whole wide range of job support services. And then another one we want to talk about is Jobs Plus, which is for NYCHA residents and those folks living near NYCHA developments, and also offers a wide range of different job supports. We wanted to highlight a few just to illustrate that workforce programs have a wide range of activities and also serve a wide range of populations. And we thought that is important to keep in mind as we go through the discussion of putting all of this data together. Okay, so why did this start? I described 3 programs that the city funds, but the system as a whole has over 200 programs across more than 20 city agencies. And like I said, there's a wide range of activities or strategies, and they reach a very diverse set of populations. And so I don't think I need to tell this group, but it's difficult to coordinate 200 programs across 20 city agencies. And so before this project, there was no like overall system view to coordinate the system. Zooming out a little bit, if we talk about outcomes for different programs, there weren't common definitions to describe activities across different programs, and so that's going to be our first step that we'll talk about later on. And then being able to analyze across programs or across agencies wasn't possible because this data wasn't together, and then there was no way to track long-term job outcomes. Okay, so this project started at the beginning of the previous administration, 2014, which for me, I think it's still 2020. So I can't believe this project has been going on for 6 whole years. No, just kidding. But so the first step outlined in this project was to define some standardized performance measures for programs, and we call those the common metrics. Then after we have those definitions, to create a single platform to put all this data together, and then ultimately use this platform to perform research on what's working, what's not working, and then be able to inform policy that will improve the system and then support job seekers more effectively. Okay, so what's happened so far? Okay, so the first step, as I described before, was developing what we call the common metrics. And so again, in 2014, a committee of folks much, much smarter than I got together and debated some of these definitions. And so at the end of this committee, they developed 13 common metrics or 13 performance measures that can be applied across different workforce programs. And those 13 metrics fall in four kind of broader categories. First is residents served. Next is job placements, which is connecting someone directly to an employer. Training and education is what I described before of getting a credential or a more advanced degree. And then retention and growth. So is a person staying in jobs longer as a result of programs, or are they making more money as a result of programs? And I want to give one example just to illustrate that this is a pretty difficult task. So I'm going to focus on job placements. Job placements, there are two metrics associated with job placements: full-time placements and part-time placements. So when you talk about a full-time job, a question that I'm going to throw out there is, what does it mean for a job to be full-time? Is somebody working 40 hours a week, 30 hours a week, 35 hours a week, 32 and a half hours a week? So even this kind of simple concept of what is a full-time job, I think it was defined differently by different programs. And so that I think just illustrates the difficulty of this task. So then after we have these 13 common metrics, the next step is to collect some data. And so this process also is not trivial. First, we have to get agencies and programs to agree to send data to this central platform. And that involves lawyers in a process that is way over my head. And then after getting that agreement, we have to have program and data folks map those program activities to these new set of common definitions, the common metrics, and then agree and continue to send data on a regular cadence. And so currently we get both participant and participation data. And so participant, we get data about the participants. So we have people's demographic info. Participation data, we have when people are doing X activities at different programs. And so we have data from 20 programs across 5 city agencies. They've all been amazing partners. We also get data from the New York State Department of Wage records for the program participants going back to 2012. So even if someone participates at a program in 2020, we know their official reported wages going back to 2012. And so that allows for like a broader set of research than just looking at the program participation. Just to give a sense of the scale, we have around 800,000 unique participants going back to 2014 is when we start getting data from agencies. And we estimate that to be about half of the New York City workforce participant population. And it equates to around 2.7 million transaction records. And that number grows every month. This diagram kind of gives you like a little taste of what this looks like. Agencies send data to the workforce platform. Some programs send it monthly, others quarterly, others yearly, depending on the nature of the program. And then that's all loaded into a central database. One part of this process that I want to highlight is the match and assign new link ID, the second kind of icon there. Part of this process is to match person records across different agencies and assign a common ID. So, for example, if there's an Adam Santos record from agency A and an A Santos record from agency B, and they have the same address, phone number, etc., then we say, okay, this is probably the same person. So we're going to give that person the same ID. And what that allows us to do from an analytics perspective is to look at how people are moving through the system. Like, are people only attending programs at one agency? Do we see people at multiple agencies? And so that is a powerful view that hasn't existed before. Okay, so I want to give a very quick example of the types of career journeys that we can see given the data that we have. So let's say we have this smiling person, Adam Santos, and we want to plot his journey over time. And we're going to plot time and the wages over time. And so let's say in 2014, I receive an HSE from a DYCD program, and then I go and get a job, and you can see that over time, wages go up. Let's say I want a career change. 2017, I go to a different job training program. And so maybe there's a gap in wages because I had to spend time in order to go to that program. And then you can see how my wages go down and up with that. And then let's say 2020, I lose my job in the food industry and then go to SBS for help with another job and then see wages over time. And so I think I like to give this example just to illustrate the types of data that we get. All right, so at this point, I am going to pass the slides over to my colleague Claire, who is going to give a tour of a public site that we've built in order to display some of these metrics that I talked about. Claire?
Hey, everyone. So now that we learned a little bit about the Workforce Data Portal, let's see it in action. So the Workforce Data Portal is broken into two main sections, the first being common metrics, which Adam gave us a lot of background on. So in this section, we visualize those standardized performance metrics that he measured, and further break them down by some demographic info. So that lets us know who our workforce clients are, as well as what outcomes are coming out of the workforce programs we track. The second piece is data stories. So this takes the data that we have as well as the wage data and basically looks at different research topics and dives deeper into some of those. So to start, we'll look at common metrics. So as Adam mentioned, we have 13 different standardized metrics that we look at for our workforce participants. So to start and to go through some of the functionality of the site, we'll look at a very straightforward one, just clients served, so the total number of clients served. And just one little caveat to point out here, Adam mentioned previously that we have about 800,000 clients. This number here is a little lower just because of the time frame that we're looking at, or the time frame that the portal represents. Right now, we only have on the upper end data through Q3 2022, and on the back end, we have data going back to 2014, but we only have data for all programs starting in 2017. So to remain visually consistent, this is the data that we represent here. So let's look at some functionality. So first we have clients served by gender. And what we can do is we can look at different timeframes if we were interested in that, as well as break the data down by quarter. So one thing to point out here, if you look at this, you can immediately see that we definitely have a spike of data in every Q3. And the reason that happens is because the Summer Youth Employment Program that Adam previously mentioned takes place during this quarter, and we see a lot of participants come in for that program. We can also look at clients served broken down by self-reported race and ethnicity. So maybe instead we're interested in looking at the data in a table, and that is available as well. We can also look at clients served by age. Let's say we want to look back at a visualization, but we want to understand the population percentages. We can also look at a distribution view here. In this view, we can see here, confirms my previous statement that we see, this is broken down by age, and we see a lot of our younger clients under 16 and 16 to 19 in these Q3 quarters. Yeah, so you can do what I just did for all the different metrics here. So we have metrics for both job placements, job outcomes, training credentials, and academic outcomes, as well as job continuity as well. So let's just look at one more. We can look at full-time placements. And if we look at this, if we look at the distribution view by year, something that is clear here is the impact that COVID had on our workforce clients. So you can really see a stark drop between 2019 and 2020. One other thing to point out is we can also filter by target population, and that includes cash assistance recipients, NYCHA communities, working age job seekers, and youth and young adults. And just to be clear about this is based on the target population of the program. So while people might fit into multiple categories, it's based on the program. So these aren't mutually exclusive. I mentioned COVID having an impact on our workforce clients. So we can segue from that into one of our data stories that looks specifically at COVID-19 and wage loss. Let's go a little deeper on this one. This is just an example of one of our data stories aimed to look at how COVID-19 and the city shutdown impacted job and wage loss. The catalyst for this research topic was an analysis done by New York City Opportunities Poverty Research Team that determined that the city shutdown had certain disproportionate impacts on job and income based on different demographic and income breakdowns, including race, gender, industry, occupation, and education. So we wanted to look further at this impact and our workforce clients. So this analysis specifically aimed to look at what was the wage loss rate among workforce program participants who had been steadily employed up until the city shutdown. And among those participants who experienced the most significant losses, what can we tell about their race, age, income, and industry? So what was the impact and who was impacted? So some of the methodology behind, let's go into that briefly. We looked at 13 quarters, so 8 quarters preceding the city shutdown in March 2020 and the 5 quarters following. And basically what we wanted to look at for clients who prior to the shutdown had continuous wages, did they have wage loss in any of the quarters following the city shutdown? And just to be super specific, continuous employment here is defined as in the 8 quarters preceding. Were they employed? Do we have wage data for at least 6 of those 8 quarters, which is consistent with the common metric definition. Okay, so just to look at overall impact, we found that there was certainly an impact for wage loss rates to our workforce clients. So before the city shutdown, the average wage loss rate was around 6.5% per quarter. And then in Q2 2020, we saw that jump up to 24.6% and increase thereafter. In Q3 2020, it was all the way up to 31%. So we wanted to further understand who was the most highly impacted. So we looked at wage loss rates by race and ethnicity. And through this analysis, we found that clients who self-reported race and ethnicity was Black/African American, multiracial, or Hispanic or Latinx were the most affected. And we can see that at the beginning, while there is certainly a different impact, this disproportionate impact only increased over time. In Q2 2021, for example, we found that wage loss rate for white workers was 27.9% and for Black/African American workers, 34.2%. One final thing to point out here is that looking at the overall trend, we see that between Q1 2021 and Q2 2021, we see this trend starting to decrease a bit. We see that for most groups, this is decreasing. However, we do see that for clients with reported race and ethnicity of multiracial and Black/African American, this trend continues upward into Q2 2021. So a couple further breakdowns, we also looked at wage loss rates by age. And what we found here is that clients, our oldest and our youngest clients, had the highest impact of wage loss rates. So that is the group of clients aged 18 to 24 and 65 and older. And this is consistent throughout quarters. We also looked at impact by wage level. So our workforce clients were broken into quantiles. And what we found here is that the quantile with the lowest wages, which here is less than $13,580, had the highest wage loss rate, around 40% in Q2 2020 and increasing into Q3 2020. And finally, we looked at this by industry as well and found that just looking at client counts, the industries with the highest wage loss rates were administrative waste management, retail trade, and accommodation and food services, which is to be expected. So that's just an example of one data story. There are others in here. We can look at cross-agency participation, and we can look at some further information about the demographics of our clients. So I definitely encourage anyone that's interested to take a further look at the portal. But for now, I will pass back so we can look at some user research.
Thanks, Claire. We'll now share with you our plans for the near future and how we will expand the digital experience for users of the Workforce Data. We're proud to have reached this great milestone with the Workforce Data Portal and grateful to our past team members as well as the city's commitment to share data. The development journey of the data portal can be plotted out into 4 stages. Much of what Adam shared covered the first and foundational state, where we develop the technology and share definitions across Workforce, which you've already heard a lot about, the common metrics. Claire demoed our current state, where we use the portal for high-level historical data, and where practitioners really come to fact-check their understanding of the workforce system with the data sets that we offer. But workforce programs across the city remain very much fragmented along with their data. And so to reach an optimal state where the data portal can be a key source of truth for performance evaluations, our team set out to understand our users' needs to inform our next phase of development. Last fall, I led user research for the Workforce Data Portal when I was in my previous role as Senior Product Researcher with NYC Opportunity. And for our research, we interviewed 6 city agencies that have workforce development programs that they oversee. We also interviewed 3 external organizations that do workforce-related work, such as policy research. A couple of them were part of the originating team for the portal, and that was really valuable to hear what the portal set out to accomplish from the very beginning. And then lastly, our team audited our current data system and identified the opportunity gaps to pursue. What I will cover next is a summary of the steps we intend to take for the next phase of the portal. All of these action items came directly from our user research. And so there is one question that all other questions about workforce eventually feed into, and it's this: are the hundreds of millions invested into workforce development achieving meaningful outcomes? And not only do our users want to answer that question, but they want to answer it with confidence. And so to achieve this level of trust in the tool, we identified this list of improvements: expand metrics, expand participating programs, offer a geographic view of these programs, and release more data stories. For metrics and programs, and to recap, our current state has 13 performance metrics for outcomes in employment and skills development. You'll also recall that we have 20 programs across 5 city agencies. We are working towards a future state where we have more metrics that include funding, such as ROI and cost per participant, participant satisfaction, employer satisfaction, program quality, as well as labor market data. For programs, actively looking at the more than 200 programs across 30 agencies and determining which programs to ask to participate. Some of the measures in which we are evaluating are the number of participants served, the amount of funding the program receives, as well as the population served, among many others. For geographic view and data stories, our current state offers a map for city agencies, as well as the interactive map on Equity NYC that contains overlapping data on workforce. We also currently have 3 data stories that Claire went over that received an overwhelming positive response from all of our users for its ability to really humanize such a large and oftentimes intimidating workforce system. And so for our future state, we plan to include map views on the Workforce Data Portal website. We will be releasing a data story this spring, and plan to continue releasing on a quarterly or biannual basis. Also, we are looking to invite researchers and other data storytellers to collaborate with us. And so please, if you are interested, stay in touch with us after this presentation. And lastly, we are updating the Common Metrics report through recent data we've received from agencies for Q2 of 2023. All right, well, so that wraps up the insights we gleaned from our user research, and it is now time for your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Adam is sharing a link to our retro board where we have a few questions about what you'd like to see in the future. If you have any questions, please feel free to add them in the chat.
I'm seeing some really great comments coming in. One of the ones that I want to address is to share the link to the website. That is in the chat a little bit farther up. I can put it again. Okay, I am going to come off mute and talk about some of these questions and reactions to what people are saying. But I really don't want to cut people off. So if you are still putting down comments or questions, please feel free to continue adding. And so what I think I'm going to do is go through this red column and answer some of the questions. If that brings up further questions, you can put a question within that question or put it in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to everything in the 10-15 minutes that we have left. So the first one is, how is the Workforce Data Portal and Equity NYC overlapping? For those of you who don't know, Equity NYC is another product from our office that I will put in the chat that displays indicators on a wide variety of equity related topics. And so there is some overlap between them in terms of what programs share data and the metrics that are there, but that's it. Most of the equity indicators are aggregate counts, and so don't have person level data. And so that is, I think, is the biggest difference. And also that there are some workforce programs that contribute to us and not equity, and vice versa. But I put the sorry, it's not to everyone. There's the equity website if you're interested in exploring. And again, they have a presentation later in Open Data Week, so please check that out. The next question is, what were the data points that you used to match people's records across different agencies? I could spend, and the integration team here could spend a whole nother session talking about this. But in short, we do a probabilistic match. And so whatever fields are populated, we match those records and get a probability score saying that this record is like 80% probability that that's the same person, and then poured through examples and examples of matches to set a matching threshold. And so this is has been a long process, and this process is not just used for the Workforce Data Portal, but for other applications across the city. And so at the end, I'll put my email in the chat, and if you want to follow up with that, I'm happy to provide more info. Is there a specific agency or demographic that benefits most from the system? I think that's a really big question, and not one that I can answer right at this moment without some digging. How does this link, and how can we link to workforce development providers who are not city agency vendors? That's a really good question. So right now, the definition of the Workforce Data Portal is city funded, and so this isn't possible at the moment. Maybe for a future state, but is not within the definition of the project at the moment. What is the difference between the Workforce Data Portal and the WorkSource One data? WorkSource One, I believe, is the SBS data system, and they are one of our agency partners, and so send us data from SBS. And the Workforce Data Portal has more than just so that is the difference between those two. I'm really curious how many program participants interact with over their careers, how many times they move in and out of different industries. And so we have that type of data because we get the New York State Department of Wage data, we can see where folks move throughout their careers, because the wage data includes employer information and industry information. And so this is a possible analysis opportunity given the wage data. We also can see, as I mentioned before, how people interact with different programs, or at least with the programs that we get data for. And so is definitely an opportunity for analysis. Would ideally like to see how workforce participation and childcare interact. This is an idea that we've thrown around for a data story, is looking at childcare, but it's not something that we have pursued in depth yet. How do we find public-private funding to support metrics and benchmarking efforts? If anyone wants to find us more money, we'll gladly take it. Can you provide a breakdown per industry and occupation? And so the funding, I'm not 100% sure. Sorry to go back. The breakdown per industry and occupation, we have that data from the wages, and also when participants receive placements from programs, then we also are able to, in those cases, the agencies provide us with what industries a person is placed into. And the next question is, what was the most surprising thing that you learned from the UX research? Jaylene, do you wanna answer that one?
Sure. It wasn't so much surprising as it was confirming that data integrity was very important. So while our users were very much knowledgeable about the Workforce Data Portal, at the end of the day, their performance evaluations is going to determine whether or not a program will be funded or stay funded. And so they wanted to be absolutely sure that the data sets that they would be basing their evaluations on were clean, verified. I saw some questions around that. And so at our current state, much of that process is sort of still siloed across programs, but the common metrics and the Workforce Data Portal is a great big first step in sort of collecting as well as centralizing that shared data.
Thanks, Jaylene. Going down the rest of the questions, are there plans to expand outcomes tracking to workforce ecosystems partners in NYC? That again would be amazing. However, at present, the description of the project is for New York City funded programs. Where do employers fit in? They aren't historically comfortable and capable of sharing data, and that is true in this case. I think that we have employer data from the wage data and from agencies where people get placements, but also there is another resource that was mentioned, that Jaylene mentioned before, called Jobs NYC. Jaylene, do you want to talk about Jobs NYC for a second?
Yes, so Jobs NYC is Mayor Eric Adams's administration's top priority in achieving an inclusive economy. It'll be the first time that we have a centralized place of access for job seeker training, as well as for employers to access the talent for hire, as well as, ways in which that they can train their current employees. And so that was released just last week, and we will continue to be adding sort of features over time that will make it more interactive and give users more agency in reaching out and getting and being connected to the people that will advance their career or their business. So Jobs NYC and the Workforce Data Portal, we are working towards integrating more and more these two products because of just, it makes sense, right? A lot of the programs that we offer or that we offer data for on the data portal, Jobs NYC promotes to job seekers as well as employers. So it's something as simple as being able to share out the outcomes for job seekers who participated in a certain program is very valuable for job seekers. That level of transparency will really help make them informed decisions about their next career move. And also for employers to give them data that could perhaps encourage them to participate in our various programs by seeing just how many people are placed into jobs, as well as the retention rates. And so that is an active and ongoing project of ours.
And one thing that we've been talking about is how to connect Jobs NYC and the Workforce Data Portal, and use them as a resource for each other. I think we have time for one or two more questions. The next question is about, we saw the last few years how important having industry-based data is to understand trends for groupings like essential and face-to-face? Will your work be addressing these categories and understanding how wages change relative to roles that are face-to-face or work from home? That is a really good question and not something that we capture currently, but definitely conversations that we've had about like how to address this, how to identify if a job has a work from home option or something like that. So great question and something that we're definitely thinking about. Which sources are used to obtain information about workforce sectors? We get that like NAICS code from the New York State Department of Labor. And so that is generally the like framework that we put it in. Is there data connecting employment and housing security? That is a really big question and not like something that we definitely think about, but is not something that we have direct data about. And then are there resources indicators that look at the relationship between type of program and program characteristics that are highly associated with higher outcome achievement or insight on what are the most successful types of programs? These are the kind of questions that we're trying to answer with this, like with this data project. We look at a lot of previous research on program evaluations. One of the other teams at NICO is called the Programs and Evaluations team, and they do evaluations of programs to answer these types of questions. I've looked at lots of research papers that they and their partner evaluators have put together about programs. So I can dig out. If you're interested, please email me and I can point you to some more resources there.